Sulfur hissed from the vents that lined Dragol's cracked market square, mingling with the greasy smoke of food stalls and the heavy reek of sweat and burnt oil. The air clung to skin like a damp film, making every breath feel borrowed. Voices overlapped in the haze, vendors shouting over one another, children darting through legs, miners loud with laughter and exhaustion after their shifts. The colony's heart beat in noise and grime. Yet in the center of the square, a different rhythm pulled people tighter. It wasn't the call of trade, but the lure of cruelty. A circle had formed, and the crowd leaned inward, drawn by spectacle. Nalari Klesh stumbled forward onto the stone floor. Her knees scraped against grit as jeers rose around her. A bruised fruit exploded against her shoulder, wet pulp staining her green skin. Another strike landed at her hip. She forced her trembling arms to shield her chest, forced her head down, though it did nothing to hide the humiliation burning her alive. Silver-white hair, tangled and knotted, spilled over her cheeks but could not veil her. Her breath shook. In ragged bursts. She had been a scientist once, her name spoken with respect in universities. Her soil reclamation projects praised for keeping miners alive in toxic shafts. That life had been torn away in a single accusation. Falsified data. They said, fraud. The words were enough. On Dragol, accusation was conviction, and now she was nothing but fodder for mockery. Spy, someone shouted, a woman with scars like melted wax trailing down her arms. The word cut sharper than thrown refuse. Rough laughter swelled, eager and merciless. A man yanked at the fabric clinging to Nalari's shoulder, tearing it free and throwing it into the air as if parading a trophy. The crowd roared. She clenched her teeth until her jaw ached, refusing to cry, refusing to beg. Inside, panic tore at her chest. If she broke, they won. If she screamed, they would. Only throw more. Her body shook so violently she could barely keep her arms crossed, but she would not give them the sound of her surrender. From the edge of the square, Marcus Thane slowed his stride. He had not meant to stop here. His assignment was straightforward. Confirm freight schedules through Docking Bay 12, note compliance, return before curfew. He disliked markets, their chaos, their stink, the way disputes always threatened to spill into fists or blades. He preferred order, efficiency. But his path had cut through the square, and habit made him take the quickest way. Now his boots stilled on the stone as his eyes found the mob's center. He knew her name. He had seen it once in a report soil reclamation studies, data that had saved miners from suffocation in poison shafts. Nalari Klesh, seeing her shoved into filth, stripped of dignity, scraped against something he thought long buried. He had told himself he no longer cared for other people's cruelty. That caring here was a liability. But he cared now, against his will, against his better judgment. A fruit burst against Nalari's leg. A boy climbed a crate to aim higher. The scarred vendor hefted another object to throw. Marcus stepped forward, not rushing, not shouting, each movement deliberate. His boots scraped stone, and people turned because they felt it. A shift in the air, the presence of someone who would not blink first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered coat that swung at his sides. The guild inspector badge at his belt gleamed faintly in the haze. His face was trimmed beard, sharp eyes, and calm that carried its own weight. He reached the vendor, mid-throw. His hand closed around her wrist, not rough, but leaving no room for resistance. "Drop it," he said, voice low, even. Authority without volume. The pulp slipped from her fingers. "This isn't your route," she spat, trying to salvage pride. Marcus lifted his knuckle, the inspection cam strapped there clicking once. The sound was sharp, unmistakable. Reports, fines, suspended licenses. On Dragol, Such a mark could starve a family in a week. The laughter faltered. The boys lowered their arms. The crowd shifted uneasy. Marcus turned away from them, toward the alien woman trembling in the dirt. She stiffened as he approached, suspicion and fear clashing in her wide eyes. He didn't hesitate. He unclasped his coat and draped it across her shoulders, the heavy fabric swallowing her slight frame, hiding her body from their stares. Her fingers clutched it as if it were a lifeline. "Can you walk?" he asked, quietly enough that only she could hear. Her voice shook, but the words held firm. "I am standing." "Walk with me," he said. The scarred vendor called after him once more. "She doesn't deserve your pity. She deceived us all." Marcus turned his head, met her eyes, and clicked the cam again. No words, just the threat of silence and ruin. She looked away. Nilari forced one bare step, then another. Marcus kept a half-pace ahead, parting the crowd with nothing but his presence. No one reached for her again. The noise of the market dulled behind them as they entered the shadowed service corridor, sulfur stench fading into rust and damp metal. Inside, the air cooled, and the roar of the crowd dimmed into a memory. Nilari clutched the coat tighter around herself, eyes flicking. To Marcus in wary disbelief. "Why?" she whispered. His answer was steady, without pause. "Because no one else would." For the first time in weeks, she wasn't an object on display. She was hidden, shielded, wrapped in something that felt like dignity. Yet shame still clung to her skin, and suspicion gnawed her thoughts. But she followed him anyway, each step carrying her farther from the marketplace of shame, and into the unknown. The service corridor swallowed them in damp shadows, its walls lined with rusted pipes that hissed faintly from unseen leaks. Stench of sulfur had thinned here, replaced by the tongue of wet metal, oil, and dust. Their footsteps echoed in the emptiness. Marcus's steady stride matched against Nilari's uncertain, barefoot steps. The coat around her shoulders was heavy, too big, but it shielded her from the phantom touch of the crowd's eyes. She held it closed so tightly, her knuckles whitened, half expecting someone to tear it away again. Marcus walked half a step ahead, his presence parting the stale air with the same unspoken authority that had silenced the mob. He didn't glance at her, didn't ask questions, didn't try to steady her arm. That restraint unsettled her more than the mob's laughter had. Men here never acted without motive. They grabbed, demanded, took. Yet he only walked, silent but unwavering, as if his role were simply to clear a path until she chose to stop out at the end. Of the corridor stood a dented door with a corroded lock. Marcus fished a chipped fob from his pocket and pressed it against the reader. The door clicked open, groaning on its hinges. "Inside?" he said, voice calm, level, as though this were part of his routine. Nilari froze at the threshold. The room beyond was dim, a gutted cum station with consoles long dead and walls patched with stains of age. The faint hum of pipes. Overhead was constant, punctuated by the occasional drip of water. A small stove rested against one wall, next to a battered basin and a shelf of tins and cracked cups. There was nothing welcoming here, just cold utility, metal, and dust. Yet it was empty. No crowd. No eyes. She stepped in slowly, pressing her back to the wall near the door. Her breath came uneven, her body still trembling from the square. The coat swallowed her form, smelling faintly of iron, leather, and engine oil. Not perfume, not skin, just the faint traces of work. She gripped it tighter. Marcus entered after her and shut the door. The sound echoed like the closing of a vault. He crossed the room in deliberate steps, placing a tin basin on the counter and filling it halfway from a cracked sink. He set a ration tin near the stove, then struck the burner. Blue flame licked to life, painting the room in fragile light. His movements were practiced, efficient, every motion stripped of wasted energy. Ilari's eyes followed him, suspicion hardening in her chest. Men who acted calm usually carried intentions. His silence pressed on her nerves more than words would have. "Why?" she asked, her voice rasping from dust and fear. "Why did you help me?" Marcus paused with the kettle in his hand. He didn't turn immediately, didn't milk the silence for weight. When he spoke, his words were simple. "Because leaving you, there wasn't an option." She swallowed hard, disbelief tightening her throat. "You don't know me." His head turned, eyes steady and dark. "I don't need to. I saw what they were doing." He set the kettle on the flame and adjusted it. That was enough. Her chest tightened at the bluntness of it. She wanted to believe him, wanted to collapse into the safety of those words. But trust was poison here. She lowered her eyes, whispering inwardly, "Don't trust him. Don't trust anyone." Yet another voice whispered back, "He didn't touch you like they did. He covered you." Marcus moved again, pulling a folded cloth from the shelf and placing it beside the basin. "Wash first. Eat after." Ilari's body stiffened. To strip herself again, even partially, even alone, it twisted her gut with panic. She stayed still, clutching the coat like armor. Marcus noticed. His tone didn't change, but his action did. He stepped back from the counter, pulled a chair against the far wall, and sat. His posture was steady, his scarred hands resting calmly. "On his knees? Do it at your pace. I won't interfere." That detail mattered. Distance. Choice. Ilari hesitated, then forced her legs to move. She approached the basin slowly, keeping the coat cinched around her. The water was lukewarm, but it loosened the grime when she dipped the cloth. She scrubbed at her arms, her collarbone flinching, as bruises showed more clearly under the emerald glow of her skin. Each mark was a memory of the mob's hands, the tearing, the laughter. She bit her lip until she tasted iron, using pain to anchor herself away from the past. Behind her, Marcus remained seated. His eyes didn't wander. He wasn't pretending she wasn't there, but neither did he intrude. He waited, still as stone. His silence wasn't empty. It was space given. Ilari risked a glance over her shoulder. He looked like a man carved. From discipline, scars lining his knuckles, his beard trimmed with precision. A man who had seen violence but kept it leashed. She realized then what unsettled her most. He was steady. Not hungry, not mocking, not false. Just steady. She wrung the cloth, voice raw but pushing through. "You're not from here. Your voice different." "No," he said. "Outer colonies. Work brought me." Her gaze lingered on his shoulders, broad and disciplined. "Military." "Once," she said, not as a question but a certainty. His jaw tightened slightly. "Scout. A different life." Silence stretched, but it wasn't hostile. The kettle hissed, filling the air with the faint smell of heated metal. For the first time since her fall, Ilari wasn't under the mob's eyes. She was still afraid, still raw, but shielded. Wrapped not just in a coat, but in the presence of a man who had stepped forward when no one else had. She gripped the coat tighter, trembling less now. For the first time in weeks, she thought, maybe I can breathe here. At least tonight. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, its steam threading through the dim room like a ghost of warmth. Ilari sat near the counter, the basin of clouded water beside her, Marcus across the room in his chair. She kept the coat cinched tight around her body, her damp hair clinging to her shoulders. The grime had loosened from her skin, but the bruises remained, purple and dark against green. She tried not to look at them. Each one was a reminder of hands that had grabbed, laughter that had cut deeper than fists. Marcus rose, his movements as precise as before, and ladled stew from the ration tin into a dented bowl. The smell was plain beans, rehydrated grain, a hint of pepper, but to Nelari it was heavy with temptation. Her stomach twisted with hunger so sharp it almost shamed her. He slid the bowl onto the counter, not urging her to eat, just setting it within reach before stepping back. She stared at it for long seconds, waiting for the catch. Men always demanded something first. A word, a touch, a bargain disguised as kindness. But Marcus only returned to his chair and sat, his hands resting on his knees. Silent, waiting at last, hunger overrode her suspicion. She pulled the bowl close and forced herself to eat slowly, fighting the instinct to devour it as if it would vanish from her hands. Each swallow burned her throat, a cruel reminder of how long it had been since she'd tasted more than scraps. She kept her eyes low, but in the quiet between bites, the questions pushed through her. "You knew my name," she said at last, her voice hoarse. Marcus leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "Your work crossed my desk. Soil reclamation. You made shafts livable that should have killed miners within hours." Her fork froze mid-her. The words struck her like a jolt. Memories flickered, the endless hours of tests, the taste of recycled air in sealed labs, the fragile joy of proving her formulas could turn poison ground to soil again. That was who she had been before the accusation, before the mob. She lowered the fork, her chest tight. "That work was taken from me. They said I falsified results. They spread it until no one cared what I had actually done." Marcus's face didn't soften, but his eyes held steady, unflinching. "They don't strip you in a market for a contract dispute. Someone wanted you ruined." The words landed like a blade, cutting through the fog of her silence. She had never said it aloud, not even to herself. That the hatred she faced wasn't just misfortune, it was orchestrated. She pressed the bowl to the counter, her appetite vanishing as quickly as it came. "And now," she whispered, "if I stay, they'll come again. I can't walk these streets without them spitting on me." "They might," Marcus said, voice calm, almost too calm. His fingers flexed once against his knee, a flicker of something behind the discipline. "But running tonight won't fix it. You'd starve before you reached another colony." She hated the truth in his words, hated that he was right. She hated needing him at all. Silence pressed between them, broken only by the kettle's fading hiss. Her eyes lingered on him, studying his posture. His back was straight, his gaze unwavering, but his scars betrayed him, white marks across his knuckles, the faint tightness at the jaw of a man who had clenched his teeth through too many years of violence. "You've seen this before," she said quietly. "Crowds. People destroyed because no one stopped it." His jaw tightened further. "Yes." "And you didn't stop it then?" For the first time, his gaze shifted away, not to evade her, but as if the memory itself pulled him down. "Not always. I told myself it was survival, orders, efficiency, but I buried too many regrets under that excuse. I'm done burying them." The confession hung in the air, heavier than the room itself. Nelari studied him with new eyes. He wasn't a savior, not in the sense she'd imagined. He was a man scarred by his own failures, grasping for a line he refused to cross again. That steadiness she feared wasn't indifference. It was discipline forged from loss. Her hand trembled against the bowl. "I don't know how to trust this," she whispered. "Every time I've trusted, it's been taken. My work, my name, my body." She gripped the coat tighter. "If I trust you, what will you take?" Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His eyes met hers without a flicker. "Nothing. Trust isn't something you force. You decide if I've earned it." The words cut sharper than any oath, because they carried no demand, no promise of absolution. Just a fact, Nalari looked away, quickly, blinking hard. Her chest burned with the weight of too many things at once: fear, longing, anger, hope. She hated how much she wanted to believe him, hated the fragile warmth that flickered at the edges of her exhaustion. But when she looked down at the coat around her shoulders, she realized something undeniable. He had already covered her once when no one else did. And that act, however small, had been the first thread of dignity she had touched since her fall. The night stretched long inside the gutted Kum's room, the silence broken only by the steady drip of pipes overhead and the faint crackle of the stove's flame. Nalari lay on the cot Marcus had shown her, though her body was too taut with nerves to let sleep come. The blanket covered her, but she still clutched his coat around her shoulders, as if the thin fabric were the only barrier keeping the world at bay. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the square again, the fruit bursting against her skin, the tearing hands, the roar of laughter. She bit her lip until it ached, trying to chase the memories away. But in between those images, another kept breaking through. Marcus stepping forward, calm as stone, draping his coat over her shoulders without hesitation. She turned on her side, eyes half open, watching him in the dim light. He hadn't taken the second cot. He hadn't even leaned back to rest. He sat in the same chair near the stove, arms crossed, posture relaxed but alert, like a guard who would not sleep until the threat had passed. The realization unsettled her more than the mob had. No one had ever guarded her like that, not colleagues, not mentors, not the people who once claimed loyalty. Her voice cracked the silence. "You don't sleep?" Marcus opened his eyes fully, though she doubted he'd ever closed them. "Not when someone else might need the hours more than I do." His tone was steady, simple. No false heroism, no dramatics. She gripped the coat tighter, her throat burning. "Every man who's reached for me before wanted something. Payment, obedience, silence. You don't ask. You just sit there." Marcus shifted slightly forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His eyes didn't waver, because trust isn't something you demand. You decide if I've earned it. The words hit her like a blow, too steady to dismiss, too sharp to ignore. Trust, for her, was a cliff edge. One step forward, and she could fall into ruin again. Her chest ached with the war inside her, the instinct to run, to never believe, colliding with the desperate pull to lean into the only steady presence she had known since her downfall. She rose from the cot slowly, her bare feet whispering against the cold floor. The blanket slipped, and the coat slid looser around her frame. She pulled it tight again as she moved closer to him. Her pulse hammered in her throat, her hands shaking despite her attempt to steady them. She stopped just within reach, staring down at him. "If I asked you to touch me," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "would you?" Marcus held her gaze without flinching. His voice was low, even. "Only if you wanted me to." The restraint broke something in her. Not weakness, something deeper. A knot of fear and rage that had twisted inside her since the day she was ruined. No man had ever given her that power, that choice. Her hand trembled as she reached for his, guiding it until his scarred palm rested gently against her bare arm. The warmth of his skin seeped into her, steady and grounding. She searched his face, waiting for hunger, for the greedy gleam she had seen in the eyes of men who stripped her dignity away. But his expression didn't change. He looked at her as if she were still whole. Her voice cracked, raw with both fear and longing. "Don't let go yet." "I won't," he answered. His thumb brushed lightly across her skin, not claiming, not demanding, anchoring her to the present. Nalari closed her eyes briefly, her body shaking in a way that felt different now. Not shame, not panic. Something rarer nerves giving. Way to the possibility of trust. She opened her eyes again, silver lilac in the dim glow, meeting his steady dark stare. "If I stay," she whispered, the words almost a confession, "it won't be because I need to. It will be because I choose to." Marcus gave the faintest nod. "Then let it be your choice. Not survival. Not mine. Yours." Her throat tightened. For the first time since her life had collapsed, she felt like the decision belonged to her. Not forced. Not taken. Chosen. She leaned closer, resting her forehead against his shoulder, her body pressed against the steadiness of his frame. His other hand rose carefully, resting at her back solid, patient, never pulling her closer than she allowed Dot. It wasn't possession. It wasn't obligation. It was proof that she was not being taken. She was being held. For Nellari, it was the moment she realized her fate was no longer dictated by mobs or false accusations. For Marcus, it was the moment he knew this wasn't about duty or rescue anymore. It was about choice, hers and his, and the fragile bond forged in the shadow of cruelty. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, heavy with something. Unnamed but undeniable, a fragile beginning, carved from the ruins of shamed out morning, came with the grind of cargo lifts outside, the hiss of vent pipes, and the clatter of miners changing shifts. The colony moved on, indifferent as ever, its cruelty washed away by routine. Nellari sat at the small table in the coms room, the coat draped loosely around her waist. Marcus had given her fabric scraps, and she had pieced together something, resembling clothes, awkwardly stitched but covering. Her silver-white hair, brushed smooth now, fell like a pale curtain over her shoulders. She ate slowly from another ration tin, no longer devouring food as though it would vanish, but measuring each bite as if she dared to believe there would be another meal tomorrow. Still, her eyes flicked often toward the window shutters, toward the muffled noises of the street beyond. Fear lingered like a second skin. She knew how rumors spread on Drogol. Yesterday, she had been a spectacle. Today, whispers would grow like rot. The disgraced alien was still alive, still sheltered, still taking space she was not meant to have. Marcus leaned against the counter, arms folded. He studied her in silence, steady as always, as if he measured not her body, but her state of mind, the way her hand shook when lifting the fork, the way her gaze darted away whenever footsteps echoed. Too close outside. Finally, he spoke. "You're quieter today." "I'm thinking," she said, "about leaving?" Her fork paused. She looked up sharply, expecting accusation, but his tone was flat and honest question, not a challenge. She exhaled slowly and shook her head. "No, about staying." Marcus didn't move. "That's your choice." The words landed harder than she expected. Weeks ago, choice had been an illusion. Everything had been stripped away, her name, her work, her dignity. Yet here she had been given choice, and it terrified her more than chains ever had. She set the fork down, voice low but sharp. "If I stay, I can't just survive in hiding. I won't be someone's shameful secret. I need to live again to be seen as myself, not what they called me." Before Marcus could respond, a sharp knock rattled the door. The sound froze her blood. Marcus's posture stiffened, but he didn't hesitate. He moved with controlled steps, loosening the holster at his belt. The door opened, and two men in guild uniforms stepped inside without waiting for permission. Their badges gleamed brighter than Marcus's, their boots polished with arrogance. "Inspector Thing," one of them said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "Report was filed that you've taken in a liability. An alien accused of falsifying data and espionage. That true?" Nellari's stomach clenched. She gripped the coat tighter around her body, shrinking against the table. Marcus's expression didn't shift. "She's under my protection." The second man sneered. "Protection? From what rotten fruit? You know the guild's orders." Harboring her makes you complicit. They'll strip your credentials, pull you off the route. You won't be an inspector anymore. Nalari's chest tightened. The words slammed into her like blows. He was risking everything for her, and she didn't understand why. Her voice came out raw, almost desperate. Let me go. Don't throw your life away from me. Marcus didn't turn. His eyes stayed locked on the guild men. His tone was level, controlled, but it carried the weight of stone. If the guild wants to question me, they know where to find me. Until then, I decide who walks out of this room alive. The guild officers exchanged a glance, unsettled by the certainty in his voice. One spat on the floor and muttered, "You'll regret this." They retreated, slamming the door behind them. Dot's silence hung heavy. Nalari stared at Marcus, her heart pounding. "Why?" she whispered. "Why not let them take me? It would have been easier." Marcus finally turned, meeting her wide, fearful eyes. "Because I've seen what happens when everyone looks away. I told myself I wouldn't be that man again." Her breath caught. His words carried weight she didn't yet understand, a shadow of scars deeper than hers. But for the first time, she realized his choice wasn't just about her. It was about himself, about a vow he'd carved from regret and loss. She rose slowly from the table, the coat slipping at her waist, her stitched clothes clinging awkwardly. "If I stay," she said softly, "then it has to be more than survival. I need to live again." Marcus's jaw flexed. "Then we make it so. Together." The simplicity of the answer stunned her. No hesitation, no bargain. Just fact, spoken. Like the most obvious truth in the world, Nalari felt her throat tighten, her eyes burning. For weeks, she had been nothing but discarded flesh. But in this dim room, with this steady man, she felt something she had thought gone forever, like she could be someone again. The hours after the guild officers left dragged heavy, as though the Cum's room itself had absorbed the tension. Nalari sat rigid at the table, staring at the crack in the wall. Her hands knotted in Marcus's coat. Her mind spun with what had just happened. He had defied his own superiors, calmly, without choosing her over his career. It didn't make sense. No one risked that much for her. Not anymore. Marcus had returned to his chair by the stove, posture straight, hands folded across his knees. He looked like stone, as though nothing could shake him, but she noticed the faint twitch in his jaw, the scar tissue across his knuckles tightening whenever he clenched his fists. He wasn't untouched by the confrontation. He simply hid it better. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking the long silence. "You've ruined yourself. For me." Marcus's eyes lifted, steady. "I've ruined nothing. I can still do my job. They'll strip you for this. Maybe. But I'd rather face them than stand by while they destroy another life." Her breath caught. She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't worth it, but the words tangled. Some part of her, the part that still clung to shreds of dignity, ached at the thought that someone saw her as more than trash. She looked away, gripping the coat tighter. "You said someone wanted me ruined. You're right. But I don't know who. I only know the lies spread faster than I could defend myself. One day, I was publishing results. The next, I was a fraud." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Tell me what you were working on." "The last project, before the accusation." She hesitated, then forced herself to speak. "Soil reclamation on the western shafts. Levels of sulfur dioxide were too high for standard filters. My formula neutralized. It stabilized the upper layers so crops could grow in treated plots. Miners could breathe longer without choking." She swallowed hard, the memory still sharp. "It worked. I have data, field trials, everything. But when the report went public, someone inserted falsified numbers, made it look like I had rigged. The results." Marcus's brow furrowed. And who benefited from your failure? Her stomach sank. The answer had always been there, but she had refused to speak it. Speaking it meant it was real. The Corlith family. They control the filter monopolies. If my work spread, their profit collapsed. Marcus leaned back, his gaze turning dark. Thoughtful. Of course. They couldn't compete with reclamation, so they erased you instead. The truth settled like a weight in the room. Nilari pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the ache of it. It doesn't matter now. They've won. My name means nothing. Not to me, Marcus said. His voice carried no softness, no attempt at comfort, just calm conviction. And not to the miners alive because of your work. They're proof. Your name still matters. Her eyes burned, but she forced the tears back. No one had said that to her. Not once, not since her fall. She studied him carefully. Why do you care? You could have walked past me. You could have done your job, and gone home. Why stake yourself on me? Marcus's gaze didn't flinch. He exhaled once through his nose, the sound sharp in the still room. Because I've seen what happens when no one stands in the way. I was a scout years ago. Whole settlements left to die because it was efficient. Not to intervene. I watched people I knew, families, burn out in the dirt while I stood with orders in my pocket. His jaw tightened, the first true crack in his armor. I told myself I'd never look away again. And then I saw you, in that square. If I walked past, I'd be the man I swore I wouldn't be. Nilari stared. Breath caught in her throat. The revelation was heavier than she expected. Heavier because it wasn't pity. It was guilt, discipline, and a vow carved out of regret. He hadn't saved her to redeem her. He had saved her because he refused to damn himself again. The thought both terrified and steadied her. He wasn't perfect. He was scarred, just as she was. But maybe that was why his steadiness felt real, because it had been built from the young. Same broken ground she now stood on. Her voice came out quiet, almost a whisper. Then we're the same. Both thrown away by people who cared more about profit than lives. Marcus's eyes locked on hers, unreadable, but she felt the weight of agreement in the silence. For the first time, Nilari felt the thread of something forming, not survival, not obligation, but alliance. They weren't rescuer and rescued. They were two exiles standing against the same machine. Outside, the colony roared on, vendors shouting, carts rattling, sulfur hissing from vents. But inside the Cum's room, the air shifted. The truth had surfaced, and with it came something more dangerous than either of them had planned for. The possibility of fighting back. The summons came faster than either of them expected. By dusk, the knock on the Cum's room door was no longer guild officers come to threaten, but soldiers in steel-gray armor bearing the seal of the Corlith family. Marcus didn't resist when they demanded both he and Nilari attend a tribunal. In the upper district, he only told Nilari to keep the coat on her shoulders, and when she trembled at the thought of stepping back into the world, he said quietly, "We walk in together." The tribunal chamber was a cavern of metal and light, built high above the choking vents of the market. The Corlith crest, a serpent coiled around a mining pick hung behind the dais where three officials sat, their faces washed pale in the glow of sterile lamps. A crowd filled the benches below. Miners, vendors, the same restless voices that had jeered in the square. The air was sharp with expectation, and Nilari felt her pulse pounding so loudly she thought it might echo across the chamber. She stood at the center, bare feet against the cold floor, Marcus a step beside her. Her throat ached, her body stiff, with the memory of shame. The officials wasted no time. Nilari Klesh, the central judge, intoned, his voice smooth with disdain. Once a xenobiologist, now exposed as a fraud. You falsified reclamation data, endangered lives, and sought to profit by undermining your guild. Do you deny it?" Nalari opened her mouth, but no sound came. The weight of the crowd pressed. Too heavily, the echoes of their laughter still alive in her chest. She lowered her head, trembling. Before silence could dam her, Marcus's voice cut through, calm but carrying. "She denies it, and I do as well." The chamber shifted, murmurs, rippling. The official's eyes narrowed. "Inspector Thin, your interference has already been noted. You risk your badge, your livelihood." Marcus's tone didn't change. "And write the report. But before you condemn her, hear the proof you never bothered to see." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small drive. He held it up, the polished surface catching the light. Her true data. Field reports, untouched, drawn directly from guild archives. You didn't erase it all, no matter how hard you tried. The crowd stirred louder now. Miners leaned forward, whispers spreading like sparks. One of the judges leaned down to his console, fingers flying as the drive was slotted in. Numbers flared across the screen, air toxicity levels, reclamation results, side by side with the falsified versions the Corlith Syndicate had planted. The lie was plain, undeniable, but the moment that broke the chamber wasn't the data. It was the voices from the benches. A miner rose, his face scarred, his hands rough from shaft work. "She saved us. Her formula kept my team breathing when the vents turned toxic. Without her, half of us would be dead." Another stood. Then another. Dozens, voices overlapping, carrying across the chamber. "She kept my lungs clear. She turned my farm soil back from poison. My brother's alive because of her." The tribunal's control faltered. The crowd was no longer jeering. They were defending. Nalari's knees buckled. She stared, stunned, as voices rose not. In mockery, but in truth. Her research hadn't died with the accusations. It lived in lungs, in soil, in survival. She had been stripped, shamed, discarded, but her work had endured. The judge slammed a hand down, calling for order, but the crowd ignored him. Their voices swelled, drowning authority in a wave of human defiance. Marcus's hand brushed Nalari's arm, steadying her as she shook. His voice reached her ear, low and certain. "This is what they couldn't erase. Your name lives because you chose to do the work. No tribunal can strip that." Tears burned her eyes, spilling freely now. For weeks she had believed she was nothing trash to be thrown away. But here, before the same people who once hurled garbage at her, she saw it. She was more than a spectacle. She was proof. The officials shouted, soldiers tensed at the edges of the room, but the shift had already happened. The mob that once mocked her was now a wall of witnesses. Nalari stood taller, the coat still around her shoulders, but no longer clutched like a shield. She let it fall open, her emerald skin, marked by bruises but luminous under the chamber's light. She raised her chin and spoke, her voice raw but carrying. "I was stripped of my name, humiliated, thrown in filth. But you lived because of my work, and no lie can erase that." Silence followed, and the sound of dozens of hands slamming against benches, a rhythm of defiance. Marcus stood beside her, silent, steady, but the faintest edge of relief cracked his composure. He had not rescued a discarded alien girl. He had stood beside a scientist who refused to vanish. The tribunal might have the power to write decrees, but the colony had already chosen its truth. Nalari was no longer naked in shame. She was clothed in the proof of lives saved, in the voices of those who would not let her be erased again. And in that moment, she realized something even deeper. Marcus had not restored her dignity. He had only given her the space to reclaim it herself. When she looked up at him, her eyes were clear, fierce, and alive. "They tried to throw me away," she whispered, "but I'm still here." Marcus gave a single nod. And you're not alone. The chamber erupted, the walls shaking with the sound of miners rising to defend one of their own. Outside, Dragol remained a colony of smoke and sulfur, a place where cruelty thrived. But within those walls, something had shifted forever. Nellari. Klesh, once discarded, had chosen to stand. And beside her, a human who refused to look away had ensured the world saw it not. It was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her return.